Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela is dead. He has died in a U.S. prison of lymphoma. He was born in 1939, so he was over 80 years old. He was 84 years old. Fascinating character. I recommend everybody go look into the history of the Cali Cartel, the formation of it, the Orejuela brothers. Fascinating individuals who came about in a fascinating historical time. Born in 1939 in a little province, his family moved to. His father was a painter. I don't know if that was like an artistic painter, like he painted paintings or he painted houses. He was a painter, and his mom was a stay-at-home mother. They moved to Cali when Gilberto was a young man, and their father left, and so now that plunged them into poverty, right? As fathers used to do, you could just leave, right? No child support payments, no alimony down in Colombia back then. He had to become the man of the house. While he was studying at the University of Cali in the city center, this was the mid to late 50s. He was a college student. He got a job delivering pharmaceutical drugs from the farmacia, the local drugstore. Part of his job was to deliver medication to elderly people who couldn't leave their homes, right? That was like his college job. What he started to do was steal from those pharmacies and start selling that medication on the black market. This was young Gilberto's first foray into criminality, you might say, right? But it doesn't seem like he set out to be a criminal. He was getting a degree like in philosophy or something like that from the university. Was better off, even though they were impoverished after his father left. But they were from a relatively articulate, educated, upper crust kind of family compared to members of the Medellin cartel, especially Pablo, right? Those guys were from the ghetto. Those guys were from the barrios populares, in the outskirts, las afueras de Medellin. Cali was a little more landed, a little more, aristocratic, a little more educated. Did not seem like young Gilberto, by all accounts, set out to be, the world's biggest drug trafficker. It was kind of just something where, it was greed mixed with opportunity, right? So he and his younger brother, Miguel, who, you can go watch in Narcos Season 3 on Netflix. This is about the Orejuela brothers, right? They paint Gilberto, who founded the thing, as like the brains behind it, and his brother Miguel was kind of like the schlub who, could never get any respect. Nobody ever listened to him. Who knows if that's true, right? Both of those brothers were relatively nonviolent, okay? This is important because later, after, opening up a couple of their own pharmacies themselves, they got the money from stealing from the pharmacy that Gilberto worked at, selling the medicine on the black market. They ended up opening some of their own pharmacies in Cali. So they're fledgling entrepreneurs already. They then began, we're in the mid-60s, they began a kidnapping ring. They began a criminal organization called Los Chetas. And Los Chetas were involved in extortion, bribery, and kidnapping. That was the big one. Now, the man that they hooked up with, who got his hands dirty, he did the dirty work. Because remember, the Orejuela brothers were not violent. They were not gangsters, so to speak. They hooked up with a man named Chepe. Go watch Narcos. And Chepe was my favorite character in that movie. He was the violent one. He was the gangster. He was the thug. He was the one who organized the bandits who did the bidding of the Orejuela brothers, who committed those kidnappings, who, murdered officials that wouldn't take bribe money. He was the one that really did the wet work. So in the late 60s, they ended up kidnapping a couple of Swiss nationals, just like how the Mexican cartel a couple of weeks ago kidnapped a couple of American citizens. They kidnapped the Los Chetas, kidnapped a couple of Swiss citizens, held them for ransom, and they got $700,000 out of that ransom money. A huge amount of money back then. In Colombia, in the 60s, that might as well have been $20 million, right? That's a gang of motherfucking money. More than that, right? That's a king's ransom back at that time. They then used that money to start the Cali Cartel, the drug trafficking organization, the what we know as the Cartel de Cali. And they, just like everybody in the early to mid 70s in Colombia, their main export, their product was marijuana. They were buying it from, the cartels in Santa Marta, the growers, where most of the Cali gold was originally came out of. That's what everybody was smoking in America, was Santa Marta gold. And, they were traffickers of that. They trafficked, huge amounts of pot back then. But, they made millions, but in those days, you had to smuggle a lot of pot to make just a little money, right? Like they called it good back then, but it was literally like, to us now in the modern day, that weed would be like unsmokable. It's trash, right? So, and it wasn't worth that much. So you have to, a gigantic, like a pound of weed back then, a kilo of weed would literally be like 10 American dollars. I mean, it's nothing, right? So you have to traffic so much of it just to make a decent profit. So as he keeps building and growing his network of legitimate businesses, right? Pharmacies, real estate, and stuff like that. It's about the mid-70s when they start getting into cocaine, right? Along with their counterparts in the Medellin cartel. Time moves on, right? They continue to grow their cocaine business. This is in the 70s when kilos are going for almost $100,000 in Miami, right? I mean, it's insane. It's very much a niche product still. It is a rich man's high. Eventually, they come to an agreement, the Cali Cartel and the Medellin Cartel. They decide to split up the territory. Medellin takes South Florida and Miami. Cali and the Orejuela brothers take New York. Now, what sets them apart? What sets the Cali Cartel apart at this time from everybody else, from Medellin and Barranquilla and the other cartels in Colombia, is that they're the first ones to make the structure of their cartel non-hierarchical. What I mean by that is, of course, they had a cartel that was not, all of the people that distributed their cocaine were franchises. They had the drug traffickers from Cali and the surrounding areas essentially just used their routes and their political protection to traffic their drugs, and then they paid royalties to Los Caballeros de Cali, to the Orejuela brothers. Does that make sense? So they were so ahead of their time. That's how the Sinaloa cartel operates now. That's how almost every drug trafficking organization operates now in this day and age, when in order to survive, you can't have a hierarchy. It's too easy to topple. You have to have a bunch of independent organizations working loosely as a federation. That's how Cali set themselves up back in the 80s. That shows you how forward-thinking Senor Orejuela, Gilberto was, right? It's way harder to take down a bunch of independent players. It's harder to take because it insulates them. It insulates you if you're the top guy, right? So basically, Cali had a bunch of routes, right? They said, okay, this is our route. This is our route to New York City. We pay the politicians and the military to get the coke to the tip of Florida or the tip of Colombia in Panama, all of these things. They had a very sophisticated, complicated drug routes that they protected with force, but mostly bribery. So if I'm just an ordinary trafficker, I could go to the Cali Cartel and be like, hey, I want to move a shipment of cocaine to Europe. And they would say, great, ship as much there as you want. These are the routes. You will pay me a percentage of what you traffic through there. Boom. That's the move. Let other people do the work on your real estate, so to speak. Just like McDonald's doesn't own every single McDonald's restaurant. They franchise it. They own the real estate that the restaurant is built on, and they let independent players operate that restaurant. That's the way to do it. That's the ticket. And Gilberto was way ahead on that.